Thank you all so much for being here. This is our second of two public hearings that Capital Region Water has hosted on this topic. My name is Tanya Buroff. I'm the Sustainability Manager for Capital Region Water, and as you may know, or I hope that you know, Capital Region Water is the Harrisburg community's water services provider. So we provide drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater services 24/7, 365 days a year. So we'd like to think we take care of the water for Harrisburg from raindrop to river. I'm going to actually pause because I'm just getting started, and I'm going to introduce you all to our board chair. So, Mark, I know you're just walking in, but I'm going to go ahead and put you on the spot.
Hi, I'm Mark Grafsky. I'm the chairman of the board for Capital Region Water. Thanks all everybody for coming out tonight. I'm just here to observe tonight. Got to have the show, so thanks for coming. And please, we're here for feedback, so definitely ask some questions, and we want to hear what y'all have to say about the proposal. Thanks for coming out.
So Mark said it best. We want to hear what you all have to say. We're very interested in the public feedback on this matter. We've had a host of board meetings where this has been on the agenda, but we're very glad to know that people have turned out for these two meetings. So I'm going to keep my comments brief, but I just want to make sure that folks do have the facts surrounding the potential asset sale, and then I'm going to introduce some folks from Fort Indiantown Gap and the Game Commission that will also help me to answer some questions, and then it's time to hear from you all. So just a little bit of background. Capital Region Water owns about 8,000 acres out this way in Clarks Creek, Clarks Valley. Most folks think that the residents of Harrisburg get their drinking water from the river. That's actually our secondary source. Our primary source of drinking water is still the DeHart Dam. So this graphic you're going to see a few times throughout my presentation, but the thick red line is the watershed boundary of the DeHart Reservoir. The dark, or the green color, the lime green color, that's the property the Game Commission owns. The pink parcels are what we, Capital Region Water, own. And then that purple parcel at the northern end of the map, that's the parcel in question. And it's actually two parcels, and that totals about 383 acres. And then the orange parcels are private. But I want to back up and tell you all a little bit about why we're here today. So Capital Region Water was approached by the Conservation Fund. And unfortunately, Kyle Shank, the representative of the Conservation Fund, couldn't be here tonight. He's doing a good bit of traveling. But the Conservation Fund is a not-for-profit conservation organization, and they do a lot of conservation easements, asset sales in the name of conservation. And they are the selected provider for Fort Indiantown Gap. And Fort Indiantown Gap has access to ACUB funds, or Army Compatible Use Buffer Funds, and we're going to hear a little bit more about exactly what those ACUB funds are later. But they have access to these funds from through the Department of Defense to ensure that there aren't incompatible land uses surrounding Army installations. And they've selected the Conservation Fund to be their broker of sorts, to help them evaluate sales from a conservation perspective. So if Capital Region Water would sell the 383 acres in question, we would be signing an agreement with the Conservation Fund. That is made possible because of the ACUB funds. The Conservation Fund would then ultimately transfer ownership of the property to the Game Commission. So I know that's a little bit convoluted, but I just want everybody to understand that Capital Region Water would enter into an agreement of sale with the Conservation Fund, and then ultimate ownership would go to the Game Commission. Capital Region Water stands to make just under $1 million if we would sell the parcel outright. The Conservation Fund would take a 10% closing fee, and we would likely use this money for capital improvements at Capital Region Water. So the reservoir. This is the watershed. This is a great aerial shot. I love this because you can see how well forested it is. And we have tremendous water at Capital Region Water. You can ask Andrew, you can ask Jess, you can ask a couple folks on the board. We're very proud of the quality of our water at Capital Region Water. And it takes very little treatment. And that's largely because of the buffering capacity, because this valley is so well forested. All but 5% of it is forested because, again, it's owned by us and the Game Commission. The dam itself, the reservoir itself, was constructed in the 1940s from damming Clark's Creek, which is a high-quality cold water fishery, which means it's been afforded the highest water quality protections by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So there are tiny little tribs, 20-plus little tributaries, and then the creek itself that flow into the dam. The dam holds about 6 billion gallons of water. And then it's released and gravity fed about 20 miles downstream to the city of Harrisburg. There's also a conservation release on the dam, which I know some folks are very interested in, so we know that we're releasing enough water to the rest of Clark's Creek downstream of the dam. As I said, we're proud of our water, and for good reason. We've actually won national taste test. We were voted top 5 for taste of our water. So in any decision we make, and in deciding whether or not we want to enter into an agreement of sale to possibly sell this parcel of land, providing high quality drinking water is of utmost importance to Capital Region Water. And part of providing high quality drinking water is comprehensive watershed management. So ensuring that we are managing the reservoir and the surrounding lands to the highest degree that we can. We really see comprehensive watershed management being those two things: high quality drinking water and well-managed resource. And we have some core values at Capital Region Water we like to operate by. That includes being proactive, open and transparent, fiscally responsible and sustainable, and community focused. And you're going to see us come back to some of these themes throughout this and hopefully throughout the discussion. I wanted to just mention briefly source water protection. I'm going to keep talking about that high quality of our drinking water and how proud we are. Again, this is the source of our drinking water. There's so much misinformation. Even Harrisburg residents themselves think that they're drinking Susquehanna River water, and that's great, but that's our secondary source. The DeHart is our primary source. And so we at Capital Region Water are moving through a plan for a source water protection plan. Source water planning is voluntary in Pennsylvania, but we have a draft plan underway. We'd like to revise that. We'd like to solicit some stakeholder input, so maybe we'll see some of you again to get your thoughts on source water protection. And then we'd like to get that approved through DEP so we can start to implement some of the measures under that source water protection plan. And that might include addressing illegal dumping. We know that can sometimes be a problem in Rush Township. Making sure security is up to date, all those sorts of things. So you might hear a little bit more about source water protection as we move forward. When we were approached by the Conservation Fund to possibly enter into the agreement of sale, it's brought up a lot of questions for staff, for the board, for stakeholders in Capital Region Water. And we've started to evaluate the suite of options we have to ensure that our resources in the reservoir and the surrounding land are managed as well as they can be. And so we've started to look at the host of options we have as Capital Region Water. What are the conservation options we have? What are the revenue options that we have? And so these are just a few of the conservation options we've considered. The first one is a deed restriction. Because Capital Region Water is the owner of the 8,000 acres that we have surrounding the dam, we could put in place a deed restriction. So restricting any sort of future use or land use of the property we own. Unfortunately, that's probably not a long-term solution because the same authority that could impose that, Capital Region Water's board, could also take that away. We've also thought about some zoning, and are very glad to know that Rush Township, and we have some folks with us from Rush Township tonight, are thinking about the same thing and thinking about zoning in Rush Township to think about what makes sense where. And so I'm understanding that our property may be zoned conservation. There's a zoning meeting tomorrow, so I don't want to say too much because I need to do a little bit more listening. But zoning is a real tool for local governments to think about land use because it is largely a land use tool. So zoning can restrict any sort of use on the land. Conservation easements or conservation restrictions are often between a landowner and a not-for-profit organization or a public agency. And these are conservation agreements that also restrict land use or prohibit some sort of future use in the name of conservation. A lot of municipalities have their lands held with a conservation easement. Public land management is then an option as well, and that's sort of what we're talking about here tonight, thinking about who else could manage the resource for us. In doing this, we're also thinking about our revenue options. We have tremendous assets in the land surrounding that reservoir, and we need to be thinking about whether selling it is our best option, because once sold, it is gone. We have timbered some of the property in the past, so there's potential revenue moving forward for timber and pulpwood sales. Carbon offsets. This is a new concept for many folks, but there are regional carbon markets, and there are buyers, often big corporations like automotive companies, Disney. There's a host of large corporations that would like to have their footprint be a little bit smaller. So they are looking for large landowners or forest owners that have carbon sinks. And in our case, it's trees. Trees take in carbon. So you can actually monetize that and sell those offsets on regional exchanges. Then, of course, selling a property is a potential revenue option. So we're taking all of these different things into consideration as we evaluate this particular sale. And I just wanted to highlight one case study from the city of Lock Haven. Both the city of Lock Haven and the Bethlehem Authority have entered into a program with the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is a separate entity from the Conservation Fund, but they're both nonprofit conservation organizations, but there's some confusion from time to time. But the Nature Conservancy has developed a program where they would hold an easement, a conservation easement like I previously discussed, for a landowner, meaning future use would be restricted. But they also develop a forest management plan for those landowners, and they have helped with timber sales, and they have helped with FSC certification. FSC stands for Forest Stewardship Council, and it's a specific certification you can have on your timber. And it often generates a higher revenue value when you take that to market, because it means that your timber was harvested in a sustainable way. It took into consideration water quality, habitat, use of pesticides, indigenous cultures, which may not be a concern for us, but some of those other things certainly are. So they can bundle your forest sales, and then they can also bundle your carbon offsets. So this has been a program that has worked really well for some other landowners, much like us, that have these large swaths of land but may not have the capacity to do carbon offset sales and the timber sales and the conservation easement. So they developed this program so that you could enter your land in as a single entity, and they could help you out with that. So I just highlight that as we start thinking about all of the options that we have in Capital Region Water. So again, we're thinking about long-term water protection, our resource management and what we do have, and possible revenue generation. And the overlap of these three circles is really the ideal management option. And so this is the lens in which Capital Region Water is viewing this potential sale. Is this in Capital Region Water's best interest? So if we do enter into the agreement of sale, what does that look like for us? What does that look like for our stakeholders, for our ratepayers? Well, it means that we have additional revenue to offset capital improvement costs, like I mentioned, almost $1 million. The parcel will be managed in perpetuity as state game land. It'll be public land. And there may be the potential for additional asset sales. If we say no, Capital Region Water continues to exercise its management authority over the property. We retain all the land, timber, mineral rights, and we can think about additional conservation planning. So I just want to put this back up on the screen to make sure everyone is familiar with the parcel we are talking about. As I introduced it, it is that purple parcel at the far end, just below the orange, which is private. The white piece within that heavy red border is Lebanon County. That's also assumed to be private. And then again, the pink is everything that Capital Region Water owns. It's just broken out into the tax ID parcels, but that is what we own. You can see the reservoir, you can see Clark's Creek, you can see all those tiny little tributaries. And I want to reinforce that we want to hear from you, all of you. We have a lot of stakeholders to consider in making this decision. The people that live in Harrisburg, drink the water, pay their water and sewer bills. A lot of folks that are interested in the land for outdoor use or recreation. Local authorities, the local township, the Dauphin County Conservation District. Those that are concerned about source water protection planning, there's a collaborative in the Lower Susquehanna called the Lower Susquehanna Source Water Collaborative that's very interested in source water protection. And of course, public agencies like we have here this evening. And I didn't think we would have Kyle with us, but I see he walked in. So I'm going to turn things over to some of our partners in this because I'd like you to hear directly from them. So first up is Kyle Shank with the Conservation Fund. Then we're going to hear from Dave with Fort Indiantown Gap and the gentleman from the Game Commission. And then we'll open it up for clarifying questions and go back to comments. All you, Kyle.
Thank you, Connie. Yeah, I didn't think I was going to be able to make it tonight, but I'm very glad that I did. Tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Kyle Shank. I'm the Pennsylvania representative for the Conservation Fund. Try to keep this relatively short and sweet so that we can get to any concerns or questions or comments that you folks might have. I'm going to try to stick to who the Conservation Fund is and why we're involved in this deal. Conservation Fund is a national nonprofit. We're one of the nation's leading environmental nonprofits. We've been around since 1985. We're coming up on our 30th year. We're a land conservation and water conservation organization that's focused on real estate and land conservation all over the country. We've done about 7.5 million acres throughout the United States and about 100,000 acres of protection right here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Our Harrisburg office is located right in downtown Harrisburg, and we do a lot of work in Pennsylvania that's primarily focused on the acquisition and protection of very critical, high-priority conservation lands, like the Capital Region Water property here. We don't own property long-term. We don't have our own conservation agenda. We don't have our own preserves. We're a transactional organization that helps kind of solve conservation problems, protects land, and then transfers it to long-term protection, such as the Pennsylvania Game Commission. This property has been a high priority of conservation in the region for a long time. Obviously, it connects two great swaths of public land. One of the most critical pieces here is the connection for St. Anthony's Wilderness. It's one of the largest roadless areas, one of the largest contiguously owned pieces of public land in the entire state. And it's right here, right in your backyard, and very close to our state capital. It's really a tremendous opportunity. I don't need to go into too much more detail about that because you guys know it just about as well as I do. Personally, I think this is a great property, a great project. So I hunt the state game land 211, and I fish in Clark's Creek every year. So I spend a lot of time up in this area, and I would love to see this be protected and be part of the public lands infrastructure. The main reason that the Conservation Fund is involved is that a large piece of the funding for this program is coming from the Army Compatible Use Buffer Program that is put through Fort Indiantown Gap. Now, I know Fort Indiantown Gap has had a lot of history in this area. This is a little bit different than anything else that they've ever done. The Army Compatible Use Buffer Program, I don't think we have anyone from Fort Indiantown Gap here tonight. There, good. Will you be talking a little bit about the program? All right, excellent. So I'll keep it very brief. The Army Compatible Use Buffer Program is a funding program for other groups to do conservation work that provides a buffer around the installation to protect the land. It's not going to be owned by Fort Indiantown Gap or owned by the federal government at all. It's purely a fundraising opportunity, a way to help get this land protected. The reason the Conservation Fund is involved is that we are administering the Fort Indiantown Gap Army Compatible Use Buffer Program. Those ACUB programs happen at installations all across the country, and there's always a third-party administrator of the program, so that it's not being administered directly by the installation. Conservation Fund does a few, the Nature Conservancy does a number of them, the Warburton Wildlife Foundation does a number of them. There's always a third-party nonprofit involved. In Fort Indiantown Gap's case, it's the Conservation Fund. We've done another successful easement on a small farm just adjacent to the installation, and there's a number of other conservation easement opportunities through the ACUB program, but this is really priority number one. And I'll let them speak a little bit to why this is such a big priority for Fort Indiantown Gap, to see it protected as conserved and as undeveloped land. So with that, I'll turn that over a little bit to the ACUB program and look forward to answering any questions at the end.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kyle. I'm Dave Weisnick. I'm the Deputy Garrison Commander of Fort Indiantown Gap. Here to tell you a little bit about the ACUB program and our involvement in this project. Since 2002, through the Record of Environmental Program Initiative, or REPI as a lot of us call it, the Congress gave the authority to the Department of Defense to enter into agreements through a partner organization or a third party to fund conservation initiatives that protect our mission. Speak to you a little bit about Fort Indiantown Gap. A lot of you, I'm sure, are very familiar, being our neighbors, with the Gap. Been there since about 1931. Been through 3 wars. It's the home of the Pennsylvania National Guard, which is the second largest National Guard in the United States. 20,000 soldiers and airmen. We're the second most heavily used Guard training installation in the country. It's significant. 138,000 people a year train at the Gap. We also have the second busiest heliport in the United States Army there, which is Mirror Army Airfield. Out of that heliport, all of the National Guard pilots virtually east of the Mississippi River come to that airfield to train. And night vision flying with night vision goggles, various things. Very critical to defending our country, both for overseas that we've certainly, the Pennsylvania Guard has been heavily involved in, the National Guard is, also for homeland security, for natural disasters, really any type of emergency that comes up. One of the things when you turn on the news are National Guard helicopters coming in and rescuing people and doing that. A lot of that flight training and training those pilots and air crews occurs right out here at the Gap. How we use that piece of property is helicopters are very noisy. I get involved in a lot of the sound complaints and noise complaints that come in from our neighbors. You definitely want to put your flight routes over an uninhabited area. That's where the Blue Mountain, Clarks Valley comes in. And that's all what you call special use airspace. That's where we fly, where there's not a lot of development, there's no light pollution out there. It's pristine. Another thing that the Guard and the Army and the DOD is that a lot of people don't realize this. We make a great effort to be good stewards of the environment. I spent many years in uniform, both part-time and full-time for the Guard. I was a range officer. When I took that job, I always thought I was going out and blowing things up, burning stuff. No, they sent us for extensive environmental training where we got very attuned to the environment and natural ecosystems. I can probably surprise a lot of my folks in the environmental business. I could sit down and I could talk very intelligently about the environment with them. But my overriding concern as an Army civilian employee is training young soldiers and airmen. So that's where ACUB comes in. What's compatible to our boundary lines on post or any installation is the natural state of what's out there, the woods, the farms, the wilderness areas, and all that. So ACUB is a tool that we can use and go with willing buyers, willing sellers. We go through a third-party nonprofit, so they are kind of the honest broker of the deal, and we're very, very excited to be involved with this opportunity and save this acreage. Next slide. Kind of list the goals there, so you have the record, but I'll key in on encroachment. We have a real concern, those of us that run our installations for our surrounding communities, our neighbors. We don't like to annoy them. The best way to do that is to ensure that we have compatible use growth that's around the installation. And for us specifically, that's wide open spaces. That's rural farmlands. That's not a lot of people. So that pretty much sums up ACUB. Our involvement is that we will go and we will fund a land transaction like this through a willing seller, willing buyer. It can be anything pretty much as Tanya listed from various tools. Those are also tools of ACUB. It's going with zoning, it's going with deed restrictions, but it can include in certain circumstances up to a fee simple purchase, which is what we're speaking of here with this 384 acres. So with that, I'll be around, and if y'all want to talk to me, I will be glad to answer questions.